Welcome to the BeyondX podcast. I'm your host, Mahia Brahimi, and every week I speak to leading industry experts, trailblazers, and market leaders where we discuss the key topics of our time in detail and have a deep dive conversation on areas like sustainability, technology, urban planning and city design, health and fitness, and more. In today's episode of Beyond Cities, I spoke with Dr. Giancarlo Mangone. In the first part of our discussion, we unwrapped existing cities and spoke on the advantages of a regional approach to master planning, the impact and importance of natural integration within cities, the impact of foreign investment on housing prices, and the importance of promoting affordable housing in general, and most importantly, the shortcomings of the modern suburban ecosystem. In the second part of our discussion, we explored the future of cities and how urban environments can be built with nature at their core rather than the reverse. We also touched on children's need for play, the benefits of intergenerational communities, the role of sustainability in city design, self-sustaining cities and the circular economy within cities, and building brand new cities of the future. The different discussion points are all timestamped throughout the episode, so you can freely move around as you see fit. Dr. Giancarlo Mangone is an award-winning urban planner with nearly 20 years of experience and is internationally recognized for his unique interdisciplinary expertise in designing and implementing communities, strategies, and assets that maximize their socioeconomic and sustainability performance potential. He is currently developing diverse sustainability projects for the Asia-Pacific region with the United Nations. Dr. Mangone is also principal of Wicked Solutions, where he brings together interdisciplinary teams and key stakeholders to deliver aspirational, industry-leading projects across every global region. He's collaborated with the likes of MVRDV Architects, William McDonough Partners, the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Habold, ACOM, SHL, Kenyang, and Meccano. He previously founded ADNOC's Masterplanning department and led the strategic planning and implementation of their built assets. Dr. Mangone's research and projects have been published in various scientific journals, professional industry publications, and books, and he is regularly invited to international editorial boards and technical committees of sustainability for the likes of the United Nations, Korea Forestry Service, the City of Jakarta, EU Circular Economy, and the Canadian Museum of Nature, to name a few. Thank you so much for joining us today, Giancarlo. I want to start off by asking you how you got into sustainability. So was it the reason you got into architecture, or was it one of the things that happened after you got into architecture, you saw there's room to focus more on sustainability? What's the genesis of this, if you will?
I grew up doing, I don't know, it was a time when parents actually let kids go outside unsupervised. And so, yeah, I used to play in the wetlands and the mangroves and the beaches, and just grew up with nature and just always had a strong connection to it, surfing and everything else. And yeah, I don't know, I guess when I was going through architecture, sustainability started to become something like Kenyang was becoming popular, William McDonough, Cradle to Cradle, all these things. And I don't know, I just, for whatever reason, I just really latched onto it and I thought it was important. And yeah, and it became driving force in my career. And I think it also because it opened new design opportunities. And in my opinion, makes design better if you do it right and not just through a technical approach, but really explore it creatively and innovatively.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's something we're seeing more and more focused, especially when you go into city design, how nature and sustainability play a really leading role into it. But I want to start things off with sort of an individual look and then build our way up to communities, cities, countries. Let's see if we can keep it on Earth, but sky's the limit, I guess.
How to make a sustainable Mars colony.
I mean, that's a good follow-up episode topic, I think. So I think one of the things that really became part of the spotlight was during the pandemic, people were really looking at how their homes looked. And because we were spending more and more time at home, one of the obvious things was, okay, the greenery, the plants, things that made us feel a bit more, let's say, tethered to the world that we lived in. It just became a fundamental part of what people were talking about. And I think it's something that I hope at least is stuck across that. So what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the trends? What are your thoughts on the kind of benefits that can give you?
So for me, it opens up Pandora's box to much larger questions because I would say a lot of things happened with COVID. And one of them was people moving from smaller apartments in the city because they didn't live in their apartment. They lived in the city, in the public space and in the bars and the restaurants, and the parks. And then that was just taken away, right? So then all of a sudden their worlds became much smaller, became only the apartment. And then at that point, it became too small. And so they moved to the suburbs. So one of the things is, number one, it shows that there isn't enough nature in most cities. And yeah, even if you have parks, even if you have something beautiful like Central Park and Battery Park, it's not like you at the edge of the city within 10, 15 minutes, you have a forest or you have a beautiful beach. It's usually not the case in most major cities, New York, for example. So one of the things is, to me, it demonstrated that there's a lack of a strong connection between actual nature access, like high quality rural nature access and cities in our communities. And then at the same time, it showed there's a demand for it, hence the move to suburbs. And the ironic thing is, of course, when you move to sprawl housing, then you're actually being unsustainable. And then actually putting plant in that is more unsustainable because you're usually using the soil for the plants. If you're using soil based, is actually coming from peat, which is coming from swamps, which are being destroyed. So you're actually making it worse. So it's actually this whole system that really needs to be fixed. For me, it makes a really compelling argument for bringing nature back, bringing the connection of nature back to cities, doing compact cities so that you live in walkable, highly livable, very vibrant cities with a lot of economic engines going and growth. And on top of that, having the really high quality nature access without having to sacrifice disconnecting yourself from these vibrant metropolitan hubs that a lot of people appreciate and want to live in. So I think it really shows that actually it's a fundamental flaw in our current development models that we don't be more strategic with how we develop our cities, and we just keep sprawling and we don't think about how do we give rapid access to nature from everyone's home, and how do we make sure that even if you're living in an apartment, you have rapid access to high quality nature and you don't live in a concrete island or just even the faux park. So Central Park, it's nice, but it's not like living next to Smoky Mountains or the White Mountains.
What you're basically saying is, rather than using this migration model of moving somewhere that has greenery outside of metropolitan areas, we should really look to at least put some of that within the mainstay cities. Is that really realistic though? Look at cities like New York, look at cities like London, where so much of the city is already built up. How can you go back now and then, okay, what are you going to remove housing to build parks? Is that something that can be done for existing cities?
Well, most major cities were actually built in biodiversity hotspots. And the reason is because most major cities were built before 1970. Okay, now this is changing with Southeast Asia, but anyways, and so basically they were actually dependent on the natural geography and biogeomorphology for their energy sources and for their logistics and infrastructure, meaning their trade routes. So most cities were founded in rivers or with a lot of wood or access to a lot of resources, which tended to be biodiversity hotspots, which are basically where some of the most vibrant and rich nature in the world is located. So you already have that fundamentally. New York City is already super compact. So it's not making an argument to blow up half of New York City. It's more making an argument for the periphery. Do you really need to build all around New York City? Or do you start to really concentrate it and have these compact nodes and allow nature to breathe and have ecological corridors that connect to it? A project that I worked on, the Dust Prince Foundation Sustainable Soil City Design Competition, was in Concepcion, Chile. So it's the southernmost city in Chile. And the sprawl is just going into their national forest and it's just deforesting everything. And deforestation is a huge issue in a lot of cities, particularly in the developing worlds. And by shifting the development model where you concentrate the housing downtown, there were so many savings because number one, they were flooding because the rivers are flooding or are flooding. The rivers flood every year. And so the sprawl homes are already getting destroyed and then they're just rebuilding them. Number two, the commutes are so long, over an hour each way, that they're losing economic opportunity and their quality and cost of living is subpar. And then it's also creating traffic congestion and air pollution, and on it goes. When you develop compactly, you create much more economic growth and opportunity because there's much more footfall in your city and in front of every individual building. So any businesses that establish themselves there have a much greater profit potential and a much larger client base. And at the same time, it makes overall the capex and opex of cities, when they're built compactly, when you don't build one story, when you build 10 stories or 8 stories on average, you reduce the operation construction costs by 30% or more. That's on projects I personally work on that we've hit those numbers. And that's the low bar. That's if you just build standard status quo, just meet the basic building code standards and health requirements. But if you actually built something of a more ambitious performance value, which can oftentimes be cheaper, you can make much more savings, upwards of 50%.
So instead of going out horizontally, you go up vertically, keeping that same kind of level of compactness, but keeping space for nature.
Yeah, but the unfortunate thing is usually this becomes a debate between single family or Manhattan, right? Like super skyscrapers or super low scrapers, if you want to call it, or ground scrapers. And really, that's a false equation. There's many more options in between. And so even just if you did 4 stories on average, there's been calculations by different research and think tanks. If you just shifted everyone to 4-story townhomes, if that was the average, and so if you say that's the average, by the way, keep in mind, if an average is 4 stories, that means you can have some 1 stories. They're just not the majority. And like in the US, it's something like 70 or 80% of homes are single family. So people talk about it like it's this little equation, but no, right now it's overwhelmingly single family. Like no one questions it, and it just keeps happening. And at the same time, there's all these other cost benefits from doing the opposite. So even if you do 4 stories, you can fit the entire global population within the state of Texas. There's been studies like that. And 4 stories, I'm not a big fan. For part of it, yes. But if you do 10 stories, there's so many benefits to creating what's called a 3D city. And you can make so much more vibrant mixed use buildings when you get that big. Again, not for the whole city, but for part. I'm a big fan of just hybrid. And with nature, everything is diverse. You never have the same standardized thing over and over again. Like if you had 1 tree in the whole world, we wouldn't have oxygen. The ecosystems would fail. So it's the same. I look at it the same way. Diversity is also beauty. So if you have these 10-story buildings, you're taking up much less space and you're not doing the extreme. But you can also have towers sprinkled in. It's not a bad thing. But the point is just to get across that 4-story would make such a huge impact. 10-story has a lot of vibrancy, and then you can go further. But the other thing to bring to mind is I see all these, like with COPE, and they're talking about zero energy, zero carbon, and net positive renewable energy and all these things. And the issue is there's so many obstacles to achieving this. And what I mean by that is we don't have anywhere near the manufacturing capabilities right now to manufacture the quantum of solar panels and wind turbines that are needed to make the transition. The amount of copper, already copper companies are sounding the alarm. They don't have anywhere near, they have 4 days of reserves. And on average, they usually measure their reserves by weeks, not on days. So we have these supply constraints in the near term and potentially and probably in the intermediate. And so the biggest impact that I think we can have that is quite less controversial and difficult to implement, because also it's been documented a lot, building the high-speed electrical transmission corridors just in the US is going to take so long because the approval process currently to get any individual site approved, it just is multi-years. So just to get 1 corridor built, there's people trying to build corridors that have been over a decade and they still haven't been successful. So how do we roll this out fast? And so I think a more pragmatic approach is, what if we did a global moratorium on sprawl? And so instead of sprawl and single family homes being the de facto development model, which costs cities, a lot of cities in the US are going bankrupt because when they developed and expanded the infrastructure, the city did that. It took on that cost. The way they funded it was through property taxes. And so the way they kept feeding their economy, their budget, was by continually expanding the city. But they never included in their financial model the operating costs. And so when you sprawl so much, the operating costs are so much higher. And you need so much more workers and so much more infrastructure, materials, and resources at a continuous basis that never ends and even increases over time as things break down. That they never accounted for that, and they're going bankrupt, right? They can't afford these things. And even if they're not going bankrupt, think of them, how much public spaces and parks and programs, savings could we have made with all that money that's basically been inefficiently wasted? So yeah, for me, one of the big things is actually, why are we not talking about just building smarter, which, especially for the global South, would save them substantial amounts of money to not copy the inefficient North American model, which also has documented it contributes substantially to our epidemic of loneliness. People have never been as lonely and siloed and isolated as they have been now. And especially as our society digitizes more, the public realm and physical and social interactions, because it's well documented, huge impact they have on our health and well-being, it's more important than ever before. And yet at the same time, The response to COVID, as you say, and this remote work, which was a subvariant of it, no pun intended there, was that is to move to an isolated village somewhere. And even small towns are in France, and I forget, someone's telling me somewhere else, all over the world, some places are actually paying people to move there because their local population is leaving and they want the tax base. But then we're perpetuating this isolation system where we should actually be doing something different. So there's good density and bad density. With everything, it depends on the design. There's not something that just doesn't work fundamentally. The only thing that doesn't work fundamentally from a sustainability point of view, but also from a livability point of view, is single family sprawl.
So what would be the solution for, okay, let's say we stick to 4 to 10 stories. Would you then build greenery in between housing? Would you still do hubs of housing space, and then within walking or easy driving distance, you would do greenery in larger spaces?
Look, it's a great question. It depends on the context, right? So every place is different. So again, if you look at my proposal on Concepcion in Chile, it was like within 10 minutes, give people rapid access to nature. So number one, if you have high quality nature within 400 meters of your home, so at least a park, it's like 30%. I don't remember the exact numbers, but you're much more likely to actually be physically active and go outside and exercise and even talk to neighbors in your free time. So rapid, convenient, and comfortable access of nature is highly crucial. Another really good example that is well documented is EcoCity, the book by Richard Rogers, I believe is his name. And he describes all these different quality of experience and quality of life opportunities that creating compact cities tied to nature give you. So like if you preserve nature, so if around you, you see sprawling nature, and you had, what was the Jim Carrey movie where he was God? It showed like he's looking out on a sprawled town, and then he's looking at it then like 2,000 years ago, and you just see all the nature that was there. So if you were looking at this verdant, beautiful nature, or if you ever go hiking and you get to one of these vistas and you see over hundreds and hundreds of miles, you could have that in your downtowns if you had some tall buildings and you preserved the nature around you and you looked out. And on top of that, 70% of all life has been removed, has been killed from this earth in the last 50 or 70 years, according to the World Wildlife Institute annual reports on the living index of the planet. And so if we did this, you would also see much more life. You would see flocks of birds flying through the air, which actually, again, all these things that are shown through science to psychologically benefit us. When we see animals in a calm state and flying through the air, soaring in formation is one of those things, we actually de-stress and happier, as well as a lot of other things. And it tends to inspire awe.
I would say any type of nature has been shown scientifically to improve mood, stress, energy levels. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask, because even if you look at the hub model, I don't know who I was speaking to, but they were talking about the future of cities from the transportation perspective. And they were really looking at having a living area that is standalone model of itself. And I think we can touch on that with some new case studies later on. But one thing to me that doesn't work if it's, let's say, within 500 meters, 600 meters is if you don't have direct view of some kind of nature. And it doesn't have to be greenery necessarily. It could be water features. It could be a pond, a lake, whatever. It could literally be wooden benches if it needs to be. But some view of nature makes a big difference, I think, rather than having it in a zone of living people and another zone where you have parks. I don't know if you're incorporating this in a way, but is there a way to have basically greenery everywhere across the city? Do we need to really design cities to have houses that don't have...
It's a great point. Yeah, look, I think it goes back to compact. And one is, think about it this way, the more surface area you take up, so the more sprawled you are, then the more costly it is to green all that area, and the more resources you need. And again, the more peat and marsh destruction you need to have the plants and all these other things. So the more compact you go, the more you can invest in your public spaces. Or to put it another way, for the same cost as our current cities, especially our sprawl communities, you can have 10 times, 100x better public spaces that are much more interesting, provide much more activities and much higher quality of nature. So a forest versus just a couple of trees and then grass everywhere.
Right.
And by the way, I would disagree with what you said. So a lot of my PhD was actually investigating psychological and economic benefits of nature, and all green is not equal. So when you do the literature review and even the studies I did, you find that wild nature is much more beneficial than, let's say, manicured nature or ornamental nature. So these Victorian era and British styled and classic North American, you have one tree and then you have grass everywhere and then you have another tree. or in some sort of, let's say, organized design, like geometric or in lines, it's not nearly as beneficial across all sorts of metrics than wild nature and being immersed in nature. And that's why I believe the Japanese started from a scientific perspective and from a health perspective called Shinrin Yoku. And it translates roughly to forest bathing. And so you literally, as part of your health insurance, get days off to go walk through the forest. And now they have forest rehabilitation centers. And I was even invited by the Minister of Forestry for Korea to go to Korea and view some of these and also advise on how to design some of these to benefit the local community. So they were actually creating retreats where people would come in groups and do all sorts of activities in nature. And again, they were documenting all the benefits, health benefits, psychological and even physiological. So they would even measure saliva and all these other things.
Is there research on why that is? Is it just that it's wild, or is it maybe having things in such an organized box to box?
Look, science is very slow, especially when you get to psychological. My psychological colleagues I collaborate with, I used to be a professor. I would work with my psychology professors. And quite a good friend of mine, John Zelensky, who runs the Happiness Lab and also created the nature connectedness metric. We would have these debates and we would do some studies, and it always remind me, Nate, the science is so slow and you'll never get this very definitive answer. But what I can say is, in reviewing the literature, it's a lot of things. But when you sum it all up, it's about, and this is a scientific term, gestalt. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's that the sum is greater than the parts. So it's more about how, this is my interpretation by reading, I'm sure thousands at this point, papers, and seeing that, because they did studies that specifically looked at the odors that the trees emit. And those have benefits. And then only the visual. But again, the images of trees didn't have as big of an effect. Looking at an image of a forest in an office versus walking through a forest. But again, that involves movement versus not movement. So they've done urban walking versus forest walking. So you try to minimize your variables. But anyways, the point of it is they've looked at it in many different ways. It can't be 100% conclusive, but it generally says, yeah, it's about immersive nature. Okay. And the good point is, when we have wild nature, that's what preserves biodiversity, which we need to survive because we need oxygen, but also helps maintain the health of the global ecosystems, but also we get much more value from it. I think one really missed opportunity with our current cities, in the US at least, it's a really hot topic once in a while. And it's a hot topic generally, but it really flares up sometimes, which is, how do we help all these rural communities, particularly in the Rust Belt, that their economies have just drained away with the shift in the global economy and national and regional economies? And I think a real lost opportunity is really connecting nature to these areas and creating strategically tourism strategies and regional tourism co-ops and ways to enjoy nature and have it as part of your economy, but also in a way that's preserved, restored, expanded. And part of the problem is we don't do regional master planning. We barely do city master plan where we follow it. It's pretty much developer-led. The developer has money, he says he wants to build something, says he's going to give some sort of value back to the community, and we say, okay. But we really need to, and this is what's interesting about some projects in the Middle East, is they're actually really looking at it strategically. Now, there's arguments about if it's actually followed in terms of development, but they're really looking at, okay, do we develop a strategy and we think about it regionally, all the systems together, and then create much more opportunities to grow the economy better. And that's where you can really achieve sustainability. So I'm a big proponent of regional master planning. I think that's actually, it can have a big impact on this issue of the slowness of implementing renewable energy, both the plants and the transmission corridors, because they do these environmental analyses per plot, arguably. And if it's a corridor, let's call that a plot. But the issue is, if they would have these regional master plans, they would have identified, okay, here's the no construction zone, which would be your ecological corridor or your core. This is where the core of the animals need to live and shouldn't be disturbed. So for any individual project, we're going to allow you to build if it is outside of, let's say, the restricted zone or the most important zone. Now, then you need to do studies to make sure you're not destroying individual habitats and all that. But what you can do is do the fundamental approval. And then you can really expedite things rather than doing a plot by plot and project by project evaluation. You actually do a systemic evaluation, which then allows everything to be approved, but also allows for systemic design instead of piecemeal design.
The first question that comes to my mind, is that really feasible with the constraints of the business world? wanting to always allow for growth, not necessarily in a sustainable way?
Yeah, because number one, it's already being done. So there's examples. There's a great book called New Localism. I can't remember the authors offhand, but they go through cities throughout the US and Canada and Copenhagen and across the world. It's mostly North America, but there's some international examples where they show that actually the way they succeeded, some of these communities, was they created a task force in the region, and it included the business leaders, but also the government leaders and the institutional leaders, civil institutions. And so if there's a region that's really advanced in agriculture, such as in the Rust Belt, then they focused on that. But they also said, okay, but how do we connect that to all the other systems? So even with tourism and all of this. And so they figured, again, in a lot of these examples, they concentrate their economy and their development in one area. Sprawl doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the businesses. There's theories like the tire manufacturers and the car manufacturers, of course, want sprawl because they need more cars. But let's say at the larger scale and from a GDP point of view, it's documented over and over again. You produce much more GDP, for example, by restoring a nature area or making an area more resilient. So creating barrier islands of nature to protect against sea level rise actually produces more jobs, and jobs that pay more and are actually more resilient and last longer than, let's say, a job in the fossil fuel industry, which historically actually pays well. So there's these interesting, from a business perspective, again, when you look at it systemically, which you have to, because if you only look at it business by business, you're never going to get anywhere, right? Because it's always going to be one person's interests, and that's not necessarily everybody's interest. I know that as leading a development here in the Middle East, what I can say is that happens time and time again where, and not just on my project, but on other projects I've worked on, where developers come in and say, we'll build this, and here's all the benefit we'll get you. And when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's profitable for you. But at the larger city scale, it's very inefficient. And there's so much better things we could do with that plot of land. Because also they try to take a larger amount of area than they need, because land has the greatest economic value and profit potential in the future, not the building. So one of their goals is to get as much land as possible that they then plan to either rent or sell and profit from in the future. So they don't have an innate drive to use the least amount of land, which is the most beneficial for everyone else, right? Because the less land each business takes up, the more businesses you can have in the same area. And the more businesses you have within a walkable distance, which is limited. So maximum, let's say 1 kilometer, depends on your weather. That's your zone. That's where you're going to create the most economic value. And that's why downtowns, of course, their real estate values are higher.
I think if you stick to the financial aspects of things, if you look at it from the perspective of housing costs, we see this especially in some of the bigger cities. And it's something I think a lot of different cities are doing now, where they essentially tell people you can't buy homes anymore unless you're going to live in it. Because what people do is they buy homes in downtowns and then never end up living in it. How do you measure for that? Because obviously, I think the conversations I've had in the past with people, everyone says cities plan for growth organically, not in the sense that this city then becomes a kind of metropolitan hub and then everybody wants to have a house in London, even though they don't live near it, or they want to have a house in Manhattan, even if they don't live anywhere near it. So how do you work on that?
Every master plan, the first thing you start with, and the thing, I really have to reiterate all the time in my day-to-day with different teams that aren't in the master planning profession, but are in the development world, is the first thing you got to start with is economic market demand analysis. And even I was going to another project in another country recently, and I ran into someone who works for the World Bank, and they're approving projects throughout Southeast Asia. And again, their response was the same that I've had, because I'm always curious their barriers to implementation of sustainable and good cities are. And time again, it's the same thing. It's politics and it's governance. And if you think that's not related to economics, then okay, maybe get a different profession. So look, these things are innately, inherently integrated, and there's always key players and stakeholders in every city and every community. And a lot of times that's what's driving development. So if you're not addressing that, then I don't know what impact you can really make. Because Vancouver is going through this, and London. I mean, it's not that the local wealthy are buying up all the properties because, hey, you know what? I have a view of the London Bridge, but I want it from this angle, not this angle. So let me buy another penthouse over here. That's not what's going on. Okay, there is some investment from the local market and population, but a lot of it is foreign money, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's mostly international money.
Yeah. And a lot of it is with Vancouver historically, it's Chinese money and it's just like getting their money outside of China. And there's all sorts of reasons for why they're doing it. But this is a part of globalization. And we hit, arguably, maybe we didn't, but it seems we've hit peak globalization in a way where we just open borders and just let everyone do a free for all over the world. And now what's happened in Vancouver and in other places in Australia and London is with this international investment, the local population can't afford the housing. But not only that, when you have vacant buildings, not just units, but buildings, what does that do to the quality of life and quality of the community and the economic opportunities, even for the local businesses? You're hurting the local businesses. It's not quantified normally, but it should be. That when you have these empty businesses, you don't get the foot traffic that when you open your business in a downtown next to all these towers, you think, great, I have thousands of people walking by my restaurant every day, and you don't. And that's not fair to the business owner. And you're depriving them of economic opportunity. But not only that, you're starving your own city of GDP. So you're hurting your own economy. So just because the developer is able to sell units, right, with those investors at a marked up rate, because there's a lot of different reasons why they're buying that property. And not all of it is because it's a sound investment, right? So the price isn't necessarily always an issue. So they're paying more. So a local market's priced out. And then on top of that, you're hurting the local economy because now there's none of that vibrancy and you don't have the population that you're supposed to be. And you're sizing your infrastructure based on it, but now it's not being used. So now your utility plants aren't actually running efficiently because they're oversized. So you have to take these factors into account and you have to regulate these things.
So, I mean, if you don't think about these things, how can you make these plans? You will say, okay, this city will organically grow in this way within the local market, right? If suddenly it becomes an investment opportunity for international buyers and you have planned it, even if it's a hub model of, let's say, 20 homes or 30 homes or whatever would work, but people come in and buy those. So your rule of thumb doesn't work as much. Can you plan for that? Is there, outside of just regulating these people out, is there a way to account for that outside of the business sense, just from the perspective that we want everyone to be within 400 meters of nature?
I haven't seen, when I work with all the different economic consultants, I haven't seen them say, well, if you build this much property and you have this much downtown and it has this view of this key asset like the Burj Khalifa or Central Park, you're going to attract this much international investors. I haven't seen that quantified, so I don't think they have that in their models. I could be wrong. Maybe in somewhere they do. But
I don't think they do either.
Yeah, exactly. So these things happen generally spontaneously and organically as they go. So yeah, but that's why you need a nimble management and governance system that is responding to this. So when you ask me, can you plan around it? As I said at the beginning of this, governance is key. And you can't have a functioning city without proper governance. So I don't see how you get around it. There might be some technical ways, but when you get into regulations, so affordable housing. So if we know that these people are investing at a higher rate and they're using it for all these different things and they're not living there, why are we not mandating affordable housing? Then people say, well, yeah. And then you get all the arguments, right? Well, then they're not actually going to invest. Okay, but then you have housing for the local population. And at this point in time, in most vibrant cities, we have a housing deficit, not a housing surplus. Generally, Aristotle said it thousands of years ago. There's in every case. So anyone can pick apart anything you or I say and point out some extreme case and say, see, they're wrong. And that's not true. We talk about generalities and happy to talk about specific examples if they come up. So in general, there's a housing deficit, not a housing surplus. We need more housing. So if we scare away international investors, what that actually means is we're actually having more affordable housing rates for the local population. Now, is that a bad thing?
Is it?
No. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on you, but
depends. But I mean, see, the thing is, there's cities that rely on that investment as well, right? So from the financial perspective, I'm always of the perspective that if people live somewhere, they should be able to afford housing.
Well, no, but give me an example. So Seattle wouldn't be functioning without international investors. I think Microsoft and Amazon would argue with that. So the places where the investor, London, I mean, look, the UK's made its own mess. It's made its bed and now it's lying in it. But the reason why it attracts international investors is also the reason why it has such a vibrant economy. Actually, a lot of people who move there come from certain countries and are very wealthy and bring their very expensive cars and frankly aren't that nice to the local population, like Battery Park. There's examples of how it was supposed to create all these local community investments and provide housing for local people. And so far, last time I checked, They might have fixed it. Everyone was getting priced out and kicked out, and there was no community access, and there's all sorts of problems. So show me an example of these international investors buying their ghost properties and never sitting in them, where it's actually benefited the city, and then we can talk about it.
I'm not saying it does, but I think when you look at it from the perspective of money coming in, then that's the thing, right? And it comes down to the economy of it.
Is that the money you need to go in, or should you actually well, I don't know. Why would you focus on the
more
people
long
who are
term?
just buying units instead of what about attracting businesses? What about creating, again, more economic opportunity for people? And again, most cities, they have a housing deficit. Their mandate should be, and a lot of them claim it is, to put the pedal to the metal on housing construction. But at the same time, with NIMBYism and so much, I mean, the amount of ways that the local community can stop a project, it arguably goes too far because it's completely stopped development, right? And so arguably that needs to be fixed because again, if you look at it from a system view or a regional planning point of view, if one neighbor is complaining about a denser building next to them, from a systemic view, that doesn't make any sense why you would appease that. Now, there's different solutions, make sure that person's happy. But a lot of times also, the way cities developed and our economic system is what set us up in this aggressive and conflicting relationship because these people's property value went up because of the lack of access to housing. And a lot of people retire on that value of their house, that equity for their retirements and for their life. And so I can't blame them. It's difficult to blame someone to not want to be homeless while they're retired. But again, in my opinion, the smarter thing would be systemic solutions saying this is the situation. And it's not it's not Peter Smith on Forest Hill Street. It's millions of people are affected by this. So we need to come up with intelligent solutions that affect everyone. Now, one of the things that I've thought is, again, why do you need apartments interspersed with single family homes? I haven't really understood this concept because walkability is an issue, right? You can't really get anywhere when you walk if you're doing that. It creates a noise issue because there's more people. I've always thought, why aren't you focusing on the transport hubs? So even in a sprawl community, let's take Boston because I just know it. And so there's these hubs where it's the end of the line and a lot of people who are living in single family homes drive to this station and a number of stations along the way. They leave their car in this huge piece of pavement that collects so much heat in the summer. And then they get on the train and they go downtown. So why wouldn't you densify that hub, right? And then you actually can create a lot of great public space with that investment. You can create parks and you can interconnect the community and densify that community without creating all these problems. And actually the property values would go up for everyone.
So you think that's more of a realistic model for the future from the suburban urban divide?
Well, it's like what you said. We have so much existing assets that it's not like we can just bulldoze everything.
Yeah.
So we need to think strategically. And unfortunately, strategic thinking is becoming, it seems, when you read the news and stuff, less and less common these days. But yeah, we need to look strategically at existing cities and what can we do. And so one thing is to densify the cores. And then even when we talk about the suburbs, they're isolated. They're stranded assets. They have no community space. And those people are disconnected and isolated. And it's not their fault. One of the reasons is because we allow false property prices for those.
Yeah.
Right? So they falsely look cheaper because the cost of that land is based on the pre-developed land or on very low developed land or really low demand land, as opposed to the downtown. But that's not right. And so when you look at greenbelt cities, which actually, when you look at the research, have been very successful in terms of limiting sprawl, but also not having exorbitant housing prices. And some have fared better than others. But that's an actual more transparent cost. And again, that's why economics is part of it, because you have to say, okay, if we're going to limit the amount of area where you can build. So you can't just have cheaper houses further and further out forever, where there's always a cheaper housing option if you're just willing to drive 10, 20, 30 more minutes. If we come up with this other strategy where we say, no, we're going to constrain it, then you got to figure out how are we going to make sure that houses are still affordable. And the solution that research shows is having a large enough supply that meets and exceeds demand. Mm-hmm. The other thing is people would argue, oh, but now you're depriving me of this cheap home and it's cheaper and it works and it's worked for 50 years or more. So why are you making a problem? And the thing is, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is the cost of that land isn't accounting for the maintenance costs and all the services that need to be provided, the schools, the fire people, police, all that healthcare costs, the hospitals. Getting proper emergency response times means more ambulances and more this and more everything. And so those costs aren't accounted for. And the cost of those services go up over time with inflation and just with wage growth and with the cost of healthcare just up. And so those aren't accounted for. So if you say, yeah, so why are you not letting me buy at that price? Because the city is going bankrupt and everyone's paying for it, including you in the long term. It's a false low cost.
That makes perfect sense. And it's one of those problems that during the pandemic became even more relevant. People look at the immediate issue of, okay, I need money to do whatever, sometimes to feed my family, sometimes to just survive, but sometimes live a kind of okay life continuously. And they don't think long-term how this cost affects them. But I think that's a really good place to wrap up the existing cities portion of things.